Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America.
Let's do it. We're here with filmmaker Chuck Workman. Chuck has written, directed, and produced feature-length films, documentaries, television commercials, and movie trailers. He's probably most well known for his short film and montage work, particularly Precious Images, which won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short, and is thought to be the most watched short film in history. Chuck, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Yes, excellent. Well, Chuck, you're originally from Philadelphia, not exactly a movie town. Hollywood's a very difficult industry to break into, particularly for folks that don't have family connections. How did you do it?
It is difficult. It was very difficult. I was in the Air Force Reserve. In those days, you got drafted if you didn't do something like that. Right. So I didn't want to get drafted and go to Vietnam. So I was in the Air Force Reserve, and I became a photographer there. And I had always been interested in photography. So when I got out after 6 months, I went to New York and I walked around for a couple months looking for a job. Had no experience, but I lied about it. And said I made a film. And then somebody said, boy, that sounds like another film that I just saw recently, that you're describing. And so I stopped lying. Luckily, I learned when I was 21 not to lie too much. And I finally got a job as a production assistant. I would just walk around with my dumb resume, which had nothing on it. And finally, I knew a guy who knew somebody else who got me a job in a little film studio and stills. They also shot stills in the Bronx, which if you're not from New York, you may not realize how remote that is for someone who, is living in Manhattan. So I was a reverse commuter. I was, going to work in the Bronx and living in Manhattan. But I stayed there, and eventually a friend of mine was making a film, or knew somebody who was making a film. Everybody was like 21 or 22. And they gave me a job as a production manager. And so I said, okay. And I made $100 a week, which they rarely had enough money to pay me. And then when the film was finished shooting, it was called The Drifter. The director was a guy named Alex Matter, who went on to make a couple more films. They said, well, we're going to start cutting it soon. And I said, okay, I'll be the editor or whatever. Well, the director said, well, he wants to be the editor. I said, okay, I'll be the assistant editor. But I had no idea what to do. I didn't know that you're supposed to label the films and write down. So I would recognize the guy would say, give me that shot where, they're running along the beach. And I would kind of remember how big it was and what color the core was, the plastic core was wrapped around. Because I didn't know that you just put a little tape and write running on the beach on that scene. But I eventually learned, and then I got a job back at my first place in the Bronx as an editor. And so I became an editor, and I was very lucky and got some interesting breaks. And the guy who ran this little place in the Bronx was Mexican, and he had written a script called I can't even pronounce it, but The Doll. And he was trying to get it made, and he had lots of money. He made a lot of money doing commercials, toy commercials mostly. And so he hired Leopoldo Torre Nielsen. Leopoldo was a really well-known director at the time. This was in the 60s. And went to Cannes, and he was listed. He was in Time magazine with a bunch of other directors like Antonioni and Bergman and people like that. So he was a big time art director. And they sent me down to Puerto Rico to work to basically just be the assembly editor, just put things together. But Leopoldo liked me, and he just kept me on. And then they took me to Argentina, where he was from. So I became an editor of feature films right then. And I did 2 films with them. And suddenly I was an editor and I needed a job as an editor. So I became looking around New York, and I finally found a place that was a maker's house, trailer house, they called them. And uh, they gave me a job. They were just moving out of radio spots, which was very big at the time, into trailers. And I was their film editor. And that kind of launched my commercial career. And then I became a editor.
So you kind of fake it till you make it sort of thing, and put in the time and the burn and shoe leather.
It was very fast, and I, I'm sometimes I'm kind of fearless, and I'll say, okay, I can do that when I don't know, like now. So I would just say I can do that, and so these 2 features were the only features really that I ever cut for somebody else, because then I became a filmmaker specializing in editing, but I really saw myself as a filmmaker and a director. The auteur theory was very big then, where the French started it, where the director was the king in terms of creativity for films. It wasn't really thought of at that time. Studios were very, very strong until the late 60s, I think. And so they kind of dictated. But then these directors came up, and American directors too, but mostly French and Italian, and of course Ingmar Bergman and Jean-Luc Godard and famous European directors that I really loved their work. And I saw that this was an artistic way to make movies, that you didn't have to make movies, with Doris Day, even though that might be fun to do. You made movies that the way people wrote novels. And I was just an old-fashioned English major, and I was interested in that kind of thing. So I kind of devoted my career to that and made most of my decisions about my career based on the idea that, will this moving forward, will this allow me to make the movies that I want to make? And so that made me a professional editor. And then the trailers took me to California, because I was working on movies. So I was constantly in between this art movie attitude and the commercial world. To this day, I'm like that. And so that basically fueled my career. I was interested in making a living at it. And so I was leaning on the commercial side, but I was mostly interested in the art film world, and worked on that, made a lot of independent things.
And so what year did you first move to California?
I'd say around 80, in the early 80s sometime.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, so you spent a significant portion of your early career in New York.
Yeah. I had a company. I had my own little film company, Calliope Films, and we had a great office on Madison Avenue, and that was fun. And I did a lot of good things. We did a lot of good things there. We did trailers and commercials. I did lots of commercials and learned a lot. And sometimes I never went to film school, but I wanted to experience what a sound person did and what a lighting director did. And so I would shoot the commercial as the director and the producer, but I also would become the cinematographer, or the just for that one. Sometimes I screwed that up, but often it taught me a lot. So I kind of took all the jobs that you have.
Wow.
If you don't know the way films work, I mean, there are many jobs, and they're very important, and they're all individual. So you have lighting people, and you look at the credits of any movie, you see those people aren't there for fun. I mean, they're highly paid and very skilled people. And I said, but I just wanted to experience what it was to be a sound person and that sort of thing. So I would take advantage of these commercials. They're mostly cheap commercials I was doing, but and they kind of left me alone. Usually they're wasn't an advertising agency involved. It was just direct to the client.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, the toy commercials work that way,
I see. Okay.
and movie commercials work because I did a lot of movie commercials. So usually from clips, but often you would shoot something separately. So I learned a lot, and this brought me to think of myself as a full-fledged director and filmmaker.
And so in terms of the trailer work that you had done, I guess a lot of it was in California, and you're using there. And at that point, it was actual film footage, and they
Right.
they didn't want to. I guess you would go into their warehouse. How would it work? They didn't want to ship it across the country.
Oh no, it was very routine. They
Right.
have in film what's called a work print, and
Okay.
that's just the original cutting that you do on a print that comes off your dailies. It's not the final, but
I see.
it represents every shot in the film, and they would send you that. It was an early cut usually of a film, and often it would change. Sometimes there would be scenes that didn't appear in the final film, but
Right.
they were editing at the same time. They would send you that, and
I see.
there are plenty of services all over the place that would duplicate it or give you this. You would cut it in black and white, often not color, and
Sure.
then you'd send them that. So you're constantly dealing in this kind of scratchy, dirty print, but everybody's
Right.
used to it. So that was no problem. They came, and the guy would come from MGM or something and come to New York. We'd take him to lunch, and hopefully we came back with a movie, because what you wanted in the trailer business, you just wanted the assignment, because once you got the trailer, then you get the TV spots. Sometimes if you did
Nice.
radio, you would get the radio spots, so they would keep it with you. And so it was a very nice kind of work, and very lucrative, uh, as opposed to the commercials, which weren't. I didn't make so much, but I didn't care because I wanted to shoot a lot, so I was happy to do that.
And so, how did you did the trailer for Star Wars?
Yes, I did. One of my assistant editors became an editor named Paul Hirsch, who became a kind of a star editor, and he cut Star Wars, and he cut a lot of films for Herbert Ross, and cut. Anyway, still at it. So George Lucas was having problems looking at trailers for Star Wars. They would get assigned to somebody who was well known in trailers doing big movies. I wasn't doing big movies. I was mostly being given art movies, what the studio thought was art movies. But George didn't like the first trailer that came in, and nobody bothered him because he had made American Graffiti, so he was already kind of a minor star. But
Right.
Star Wars, no one knew what that was. It was some kind of science fiction movie that this guy
Right.
Lucas was doing in
Yeah.
Northern California, so no one knew anything about it. So anyway, they gave the trailer to a big trailer company, and they didn't do very well, according to George.
Okay.
And they kind of missed the point, because they were selling it as a kind of a old-fashioned, Hollywood science fiction film, not realizing how unique it was. Then they gave it to somebody else to do a trailer on, where they shot something. They actually shot, which they don't do rarely. They rarely do in trailers, but they actually shot some new material, and
Wow.
they didn't like that either. So Paul Hirsch, this guy that used to work for me, was cutting Star Wars, who was one of 3 editors, and he recommended me to George. And so they called me up. They invited me to a screening. I remember it was me and 2 other people in a screening room, in a room where film was done on reels in those days, and the reels only lasted 10 minutes in the screening room, 20 minutes in the theater. So I'm sitting there with 2 other people, writer friends of George's, and watching this movie. And the first reel ends, and they have to stop and rethread everything for the second reel. And the three of us looked at each other like, what are we looking at? This is amazing. We've never seen anything like this before. It was so unique and to us. And we were professionals in this business. It was just such a treat to watch, and started with such a bang that we were just delighted to sit there and watch it. And I'll never forget that feeling when that reel ended, because we were in another world. And there are great movies, there's 8.5, and there's Bergman, and, Jules and Jim. I mean, they're great movies.
Yeah.
But this was a Hollywood movie that was different, that talked to everybody. And that was the secret of it, I think. That was just so unique and pleasing to young people who were not really interested in the Clark Gable, Betty Davis world anymore at all.
Right.
And certainly not in the 50s movies, which were these widescreen, the better ones like Ben-Hur, okay, but they were all kind of bad romances and melodrama, And to this day, I talk about that, the difference between those Hollywood movies and real cinema. So George Lucas and his people, but mostly it was George. I mean, he was a one-man show, and he created something that was very different and for a much younger audience. And so that really got me started in better trailers. Then I did Close Encounters because George told Spielberg, "Oh, I worked with this guy, Chuck Workman. We didn't have to deal with the studios or the marketing department. He just did it, and I worked on it." And so Stephen, I think, was doing 1941 at the time, which was a film that he didn't want to show to Universal. He just wanted to do it. And so he just hired me and he brought me in. So I started doing those kind of movies, better movies, more auteur, which is the phrase, oriented movies, director-oriented movies. And I got a reputation for that. And that was good too.
Wow. It sounds like the shift in film happened later than it did in music. We look at, let's say, the Beatles in 1965.
Even before that, there was rock and roll. There was kind of rhythm and blues,
Right, true.
But the
true.
Beatles were studying those American songs too. So
of course, yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the music did change, and but movies didn't change.
Yeah.
The movie industry is very slow moving. They act like they're hip and everything, but they're not. They just want to make money. I mean, that's really what they want to do. They're a business. And all the toy commercials I did, just by accident. My wife was in the toy business when I met her, and I met a lot of people. And this place in the Bronx did a lot of toy commercials, so I got into that. These kind of things. Where there's a very short shelf life, where they have to grab you right away, was a very different kind of attitude than the normal marketing that you would get with advertising agencies for Coke or Pan Am or whatever was hot at the time. And so that was a great experience to do all that, and it taught me a lot about movies at the same time.
Wow. And so it sounds like a theme is that you've been able to support your work in life with doing the commercial side, but you really have a great interest in the avant-garde. I mean, you mentioned 8.5 and
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That to me. I mean, I'm writing a book now that is about that. It's mostly about the difference between movies, as much as we like them, and I like them too, and we all like a good movie.
Yeah.
But a movie is not cinema, where you're using this form where you use actual reality use real things. Me talking, you talking, whatever it would be. Somebody outside watering their lawn. You pull all these things together and use them to create some sort of concept that is an artistic concept that you can't really describe. So you can't really say that Jules and Jim, for instance, I mentioned that before, is about, the story is about two men in love with the same woman and what happens. But that's just the beginning of it. I mean, you feel it. You just, when you watch it, the shots when they're running down a street or whatever it is, all those shots kind of tell you something. And then the editing, when they put it all together, also tell you something more. So you're constantly getting more information the way you would when you're looking at a painting or you're listening to a symphony. You're getting much more than just what's on the surface. But the Hollywood movie, because it's such a big business and so much devoted to that, they don't want to change. They want it to be the same. I remember pitching a TV show that a friend of mine was a producer, and he brought me into Warner Brothers. And he said, "Will you come with me and you'll be the creative side of this idea I'm trying to pitch Warner's to do as a TV show, as a series." And we went into the meeting, and the woman in charge was just talking, and she was kind of interested in whatever this idea was. And I remember saying, "Yes, and we can make it different every week." And she said, "Oh no, we don't want it to be different every week. People don't want things to be different in our business. They want it to be the same, but a little different." And that really was a big lesson for me. By the way, we didn't get the job, but because I probably didn't say anything. I was never that great at those meetings. I was good enough that I got a lot of work, but not good enough to really nail certain things. And so that's the way it works. And people don't really realize that. And people say, "Well, I go to the movies. Well, what's your favorite movie?" "Oh, Night of the Living Dead," or whatever it would be. I mean, When Harry Met Sally. And you want to say, "No, I don't mean that kind of movie. I mean cinema. What the cinema, the art form. What is important to you?" And then you looked on as being a snob, or not really understanding. And people get mad because if you told me your favorite movie, I mean everybody, my wife, constantly in arguments. "What's your favorite movie?" And they say, "Jaws." And I'd say, "Well, yeah, but that's some pop movie and very well done." Very well done, well acted, and well shot and interesting, but it's certainly not
Godard, Fellini,
not Godard, and not even Star Wars. So there are American movies that certainly change that, and we, are better than that, but they are not interested in that. The studios don't want to make that. It's not their fault. They're in the toy business. They're in the shirt business, whatever business they would be in, and so they're not interested in doing anything different. I did a film for HBO on the history of the movies called The First 100 Years.
Right. And
the HBO person, the woman who was in charge of me, we had a discussion before, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm trying to do that." And she said, "Chuck, don't try anything. Just do what you've been doing all these years. Do the same thing, and give us that, and that's what we want." And I'd say, "Yeah, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested." And I could see that I was going in the wrong direction. That what I want had nothing to do with it. I was delivering what the audience would want, but in a particular way. And that is my style, and they knew a certain kind of look to it, and hopefully a flair. But they really are very careful. about that. And and everything's like that in creative work, fortunately. So look, it's great that music. You mentioned music. That music has a way of breaking through that, because it's very easy. But I was reading something about MacArthur Park. There was a famous song that Jim Webb wrote. MacArthur Park is that was 7 minutes long, and they insisted that it be 7 minutes long. And some disc jockeys played it. This was around the Beatles time, and some didn't, and that was the way it worked. But at the same time, the Beatles loved this song, and Lennon or McCartney, I think it was McCartney, wrote "Hey Jude," and that was 7 minutes long. And they were inspired because of this other song called MacArthur Park. So it was easier to kind of break through to be the Beatles than it is, I think, in the movies. I think that the movies are just, they're too expensive, and they're in business.
Yeah. And you said, I think story is an overrated experience in the creation of true cinema. Can you talk more about that? And I think
Oh,
you
yeah,
touched
I
upon it.
spoke about that for hours. I'll try and make it short. No, story is something that if I told, let me start with Shakespeare. We love Shakespeare. We think he's important. His audience was a popular audience. They wanted to hear all that kind of language and that iambic pentameter. But the stories he got from anywhere. I mean, he didn't care. Macbeth was already a play out there when he wrote Macbeth. But he wanted to do it his way. So the story itself is just the bones that you put your art on. And it's overrated, is all I'm saying. When you go to film school now, they all talk about storytelling. Storytelling is the word used more than anything in academic places when they talk about film, and now in other places too. I mean, you just hear it. I mean, James Earl Jones, who as we're speaking had just died.
Yes.
Talked about storytelling when he was Darth Vader. He said, "Well, my voice was telling the story." So even a pretty smart actor thinks that. I don't think that. I think I want to see the inventiveness and the artistry of the filmmaker, and a lot of them don't care. They just say, "No, I have to just tell the story." The stories are predictable, aren't they? I mean, they're melodramatic. We know what's going to happen almost always. And the lower we get in the pecking order of big features, art features, down to television, down and down and down to streamers, sitcoms, the story is more and more predictable, more obvious. But the story is just what they hang their performances on. And sometimes the stories work in terms of being compelling, but usually they're just something that we've seen before. And so that's why I feel that that's not true cinema for me. I mean, cinema for me is taking any story, doesn't matter what it is. Jack and Jill went up the hill, but doing it in a way that uses the means of making films, uses the technique in a way to express something. So this shot of me and this shot of me is different, and you have to choose which one, or neither, or just have an empty of me over here. All those things are not in the story, but they're expressing a theme that is so much more important. Life is not just your story. Life is everything, and so we want to life is everything. It's not much of a statement, but there is so much detail, and we can do it with cinema, with film, and they don't always. Drama has been around for hundreds of years, thousands of years, almost, and we are used to that. We're used to plays doing that, having detail, having the same story over and over and over again. Drama began with so-called miracle plays, which were basically Christian stories. So it was the same story. Somebody wrote something about a person, a rich man, going to Italy to look at the paintings and look at all the pictures that he could see. He got interested in art late in life. And he came back and they said, well, how was your trip to Italy? Did you go to churches? Yeah, I went to the churches, museums, and everything. It was always the same story. It was about Christ and his mother and his death and everything. That all the pictures were about that. In other words, all that, the centuries of wonderful painting that you would see in Italy, you don't see, because he didn't see. He was just looking at the picture, at the story on the picture. So there's obviously more to do.
You think the rise in screenplay, and we talk about story, Robert McKee's book Story is very popular.
Yeah, that's formula. It's giving you a formula.
Right. And you can express certain elements of camera angles within a screenplay, but if it's too screenplay based, then it becomes too much about the plot and story and less about the artistry.
Well, I mean, there are great writers that I made a film called What is Cinema, where I went to what I felt were very, very different. Trying to answer the question, answer. There were many different kinds of directors in it. David Lynch, Robert Altman, Mike Lee, people that I admired. And there were some there in that group that were very interested in script. That's what they leaned on.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make cinema with great scripts, and we've seen that done often, but that doesn't mean that has to be the thing, and you have to kind of break away from those formula and read these books. Of course, these books are popular because the people that are buying the scripts, the studio people, have also read Robert McKee, and they're taking that as a rule. Oh, but Robert McKee says on page 40, this has to happen. And on page 70, this has to happen. And on page 90, this has to happen. And even people that, Robert McKee is very sharp about that kind of stuff and gives you a lot of good advice. But you can look at greater philosophers, let's say, who think about structure and stories and things like that. And we get the feeling of, well, there's a first act and a second act and a third act. And if you follow that, the audience will stay in the seats. You'll keep the asses in the seats. So it does make sense. But what you should do on page 20, what you should do on page 40 is a very good primer for some people to write. And they may get away with it, but they're not using the structure. You should use what happens on page 20 to push your theme, to do something that's meaningful to the ideas that you want to put through, basically. And so this is what I say. This is this great medium where you're using real people often. Real things, real life, real moments. And you could move them around and you could change them and you could lengthen them and you could put them in green or you could make them, purple, whatever you wanted to do to further this idea that you have without actually expressing it in words. And so that's what's wonderful and very difficult.
Can you talk about visionaries?
Visionaries. I had my whole life been interested in experimental film, but I never really, I guess it's guilt. I mean, maybe I feel guilty that I'm out there on the Oscars while they're in a loft, And I know a really great filmmaker who has lived in a loft and raised two kids in the same loft. It's 4 flights up, he and his wife and the 2 kids. And they've all done very well. And I remember I was doing a film, I was shooting Vision, and I would happen to be shooting this guy in his loft. And at the same time, I was doing something for Michael Jackson, where I was shooting, he was doing a concert, about to do a concert. And I did the opening of the concert, a film, obviously, of Michael Jackson. Right. So what I was making on that film, and believe me, I never made this all the time, but was more than probably this guy made in a year. Yeah. And you kind of have to balance that, because these are people who are devoted to exactly what I'm saying. There's a famous film called Back and Forth. It's really not called Back and Forth. It's 2 arrows, one going that way. And it's a camera. It's by Michael Snow, who's a Canadian filmmaker, considered one of the great experimental filmmakers. It's just the camera going back and forth over a scene. He did another film where he kind of zooms in toward the scene. This is what, and then you have to think about, well, what is this about? What am I supposed to take away from this? The story? Yeah, there was a story. There was a story. Things were happening in that back and forth thing, and you could look for that. But wait a minute, why is it shot like that? What is that all about? What is that telling me that I didn't know before about anything, about the world, about life, about God, about whatever, about nothing, and so the technique pulls you into that. Well, most of experimental films were like that. I mean, they really cared about technique a lot, and a lot of people turned them off. In fact, I even wrote an article for a magazine in the 70s, I think, about parodying those films, to some extent. Because sometimes there's another terrific film where you just hear a song, Ella Fitzgerald singing the song "All My Life," and it pans around the garden. Just pans. Camera pans for 3 minutes, then goes up to the video. Is that about the song? Is that about the pan? Is that about the garden? It's about everything, and you don't have to explain it unless you're a critic. But you don't need that. It's telling you. So I wanted to make a film about it. And I knew Jonas Mekas, who was one of the great people of that world. Great filmmaker, great organizer, writer, everything. So I said, okay, I'll make a film about Jonas and his world, and try and put a little primer for all the people who don't know about these great films into the middle of that. So, well, the film is clunky. I mean, it's not meant to be more than what I just explained. But I was able to get a lot of time with Jonas, and I shot at Anthology Film Archives, which is a place in New York that represents a lot of those films, and I showed all those films, and I just started shooting it, and I eventually finished it, and I showed it, and I went to it. There was a gallery opening of one of Jonas's group of Jonas's films, because these films were shown in art galleries, and they were shown in theaters all over. Wow. Meant for that. There was a guy there who was a supporter of Jonas. He was a real estate guy, very successful, named Charles Cohen. And he was at the party, and I shot him, and I met him, and I talked to him. And then I had a meeting with him, and we made 2 films together, 2 commercial films, documentaries. So sometimes things lead. I mean, if you wanted to say, well, why did you spend, you know, your own money to make this documentary? Well, it led to actually more, business. So it made me feel a little better. But I was very happy that I did. I didn't get a lot of distribution, a little bit.
Yeah.
But I was very happy that I made it. I showed the people that are in that were liked it and played in Tribeca and places like this.
Great. And Directors Guild of America, how did you get involved with them? And maybe we can touch on Precious Images for a little bit. We got to talk about it, so I want to talk.
All right.
Well,
Well, I'll ramble on, so just push me wherever way.
All right.
I was very interested in the Directors Guild, even when I was in New York before I was a member. And I don't remember why. I guess because I wanted to be institutionalized. There is even if you're an independent artist, which part of me was, there was this other part that we talked about already, where I was interested in kind of institutionalizing of filmmaking, and I liked the DGA. I knew a couple of directors, and they did have a presence in New York, so I joined and became a director. It was great because they had a great pension plan, and 50 years later, 30 years later, I cashed in on it. And they also had a great medical plan. But at the same time, I was interested in the extra stuff that they did. And Ilya Kazan and Robert Wise had started a little committee of both special projects about education and allowing members to see, better made films. And I was very much interested. I moved to LA, to Malibu, actually, to a very little house between 2 very big houses next door to it. Fabulous house. And I went outside the first day or so, and there was this elderly man, elderly to me, he was 60. Now he'd be young to me. Was walking on the beach, and I kind of recognized him. And I realized it was Robert Wise, who was the chairman of this committee. Wow. And I went and talked to him, and I knew all about him, that he had edited Citizen Kane and, all his wonderful films, West Side Story. I think I did the trailer on a rerun, on a reissue of West Side Story, so I knew a lot of that. And he invited me to be on this committee. He thought, oh, here's some young guy who knows something about movies, and maybe he'd be good on this committee. And so I became part of the Special Projects Committee. Well, the Directors Guild anniversary, the 50th anniversary came up, and our committee was kind of in charge of doing it. And they said, well, we should do something. And I said, well, let's make a film. I had already helped make a couple films, educational films for the Directors Guild. It turned out okay. I said, well, let's make a trailer of every Directors Guild movie ever made. I said that kind of blithely. And we ended up doing something like that, although we took 450 movies, not every one, but 450 movies in a short 7 minutes. So that kind of, they said, go, do it. So it didn't cost them anything. It cost them a few dollars. And they were able to basically make 4 or 5 phone calls to the studios saying, we're doing this, okay? And there was no rights then or anything like that.
Right.
If you wanted to show clips of my movies right now, you'd have to clear it with somebody, or at least make newsworthy. So there was no problem with that. So we just ordered up all these movies. And I remember I had one assistant, John Santos, and he would be dragging these prints up. Technically, it would have been very difficult to do it the right way. So I did it kind of the wrong, just use these prints, actual film prints or trailers as the masters to make negatives of all these little scenes. And we ended up cutting, as I say, 450 scenes in about 6.5, 7 minutes. So they were really cutting fast. They were cutting like averages 1 a second. And I would get calls while I was making it from different directors. Hey, Chuck, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And they yakking. And finally, they, hey, what's happening with that movie? I hope you put my movie in it.
Right.
And I probably didn't, but maybe I did. But I love doing that film. I love the quick cutting. I had come from trailers and felt I knew a lot about it and how it worked. Because obviously I'm cutting every second, you know, in regular movie, it's 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 7 seconds for a shot before you have a cut. So I did it, and then I had to find the structure for it, which was tricky, but I kind of found that. And then I had to figure out all the shots and everything. And I gave it a subtext, the subtext being that the movies were the start, this life of the movies. And watching movies was basically what this was about, not just a lot of shots of kisses in a row, but how they worked, because I would do a bunch of kisses in a row, then I'd cut the Lady and the Tramp, where the dogs are kissing, you know, or something else like that. And that was kind of the concept of kind of breaking it up and looking at what Hollywood, when I say Hollywood, I mean just mass market films, thought about this. Because Hollywood didn't care, Lady and the Tramp or Barbra Streisand. It was a romance. People were kissing. And that's what they were interested in. So that kind of gave it the glue that people didn't really see that much before. Not that I was the first person ever to cut somebody kissing to Lady and the Tramp kissing, but that continued through the entire film. And that kind of made the film. And then about midway through the film, I changed it. I used the music from The Natural, Randy Newman's music, which is very heroic. Great sounding music you hear on commercials. And that sort of took me to the end where I showed all the classics, famous stars. And it was done. And then we said, well, what do we do with it? Well, we started showing it. Of course they liked it because it had all their favorite movies in it, you know.
Right,
and
right.
Hopefully I didn't screw it up, you know, that it was all there. But it also had a theme, you know, that they related to as a film. And it became very immensely popular. It's no longer the most shown short because of all the internet shorts. So something about Barbie would be more much shown. But before the internet, this was it won the Oscar in '87, so it was few years before a lot of films, where it was shown all of the British Film Institute would show it on a loop. You'd walk through there and I'd hear it. I'd say, wait a minute, there's the music from The Natural. What is that? And I'd walk in and there was my film. In fact, they cut the credits off. The credits were not very long, but it's me and Bob Wise. And Wise saw that and he got mad, not on behalf of himself. He had enough credits, but on behalf of the Directors Guild. He said, you can't take the credits. And he made the British Film Institute put the credits back on, but they kept looping it. And it was shown in many, many film festivals. It was shown in many schools, you know, to intro classes and things like that. And so it was very big in my career. And when you win the Oscar in that world, it's like you're knighted.
Yeah, I've heard you.
I've said that. Yeah, and it's true. It's really true.
Yeah.
I used to get introduced. My films were always introduced where they mentioned my name. Here's a film by Chuck during the ceremony. So there was another guy who made very good films, and he also made films for the Oscars. And he went into the producer, Gil Case, and he said, "Why can't you mentioned my name. Why do you have to only mention Chuck's name? And the guy said, well, Chuck won an Oscar. So I can
Academy
say
Award winner, Chuck
That-
Workman.
exactly.
Sir Chuck Workman.
That's right. So that's what you want. So Chuck Workman. I used that before. And so that did change my career to some extent because I got so many invitations to make a film about Woody Allen, a film about this person, some about the directors, a film about subjects. I did a film for politics on film for that dinner that the political journalists have every year.
Al Smith dinner.
Yeah, whatever it's called. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did a film, and these institutions would like to have their own film. Why not? And also, film was getting different. It was more accessible in certain ways. It wasn't. There was so much independent beginning, certainly in the 80s, and the 90s, that it became quite conventional, and everybody's kid was in film school and things like that.
Right.
So it became kind of an easy thing. So it just became a very popular film. It still is, actually. I just wrote an article for a magazine about the making of it.
Yeah.
So
and you did 20 of those like opening montages for the Oscars, a couple for the
22.
Emmys.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
But of which maybe 15 were okay, you know. What happens also is producers or studios, they say, oh, I want to do that. And then they become your friends and your partners, your creative partners.
Oh, just what you want, right.
You have to kind of try and back down. So
right.
And then the Academy got very political, and they were really upset and about the whole Black Lives Matter movement in terms of the Oscars. They had something called Oscars So White.
Yes, I remember
that. So everything I did, they wanted more and more and more diversity. Right. And I would put it in anyway. I was putting in diversity in 1975, so I was no problem. And I thought it was important also. But they really started to meddle. And the Oscars, as you know, went through a period, they're coming back, I think. They went through a period where they kind of messed up. But I think they're coming. But
yeah, there was I remember seeing a sign at a garage, and they said the labor rate, $75 an hour. Labor rate, you watch, $100 an hour. Labor rate, if you help, $150 an hour. It kind of seems very similar to that.
It's very true. It's very because it's fun. It's fun to pickle. I did a film for Sundance, and you think Sundance is the best. I mean, we would, Glenn Close called me up, and she was head of this committee or something, right, to do the highlights of Sundance for their anniversary. They couldn't stop giving me suggestions. They had meetings. And I told Glenn Close, I can't deal with any committees. I said it in a nicer way, but
right.
With my teeth punched. And she said, no problem, I'll protect you. I'm an actor. I understand that. But then she was in a skiing accident, or so they said. And he wasn't there anymore. And I had to deal with this huge committee of people I knew and liked. Well, one was related to my family, and yet they couldn't stop. It's very interesting to say, oh, let's put in, some good movie with Jimmy Stewart or something there. And it's easy to do. And also, most movies are not that hard. Good movies are very, but most movies that are made are not that different, formulaic.
So you've done a lot of.
Well, let me finish that in case somebody.
Sure, please.
But they're done by very, very talented people.
Yeah.
The people themselves that are making it are very talented and very skilled at what they do. But the subject itself in mass market movies is not particularly difficult to.
Right.
to
So
have.
it's less about the artist. It becomes less about the professionalism and talent of the artist and more about how they can maneuver within what the needs are of
Yeah, exactly.
who's
Except
commissioned
that
it.
because they have such high professionalism, as you put it, that they that makes the movies kind of special. These Hollywood movies, and so you go to see them and you say, "Oh, that was terrific. How'd you like that? Oh, it was great. The actors, and you get used to that. But basically, they're just doing what they do, like a plumber does. I'm doing what I do, or a carpenter, um, or anything, any person doing a job, trying to do the job as best as you can. But the plumber doesn't criticize the bathroom; he fixes the bathroom.
Right. Well, there you go. And you've done a lot of subject matter where you did Superstar, Andy Warhol, Orson Welles, a tribute to Charlie Chaplin. To talk about why you took those on and what projects did you decline?
Oh, I don't decline much. I when I used to teach, I would write 4 letters on the blackboard when I talked about career, and I'd say, "This is the best thing I could tell you." And the words were for the word sure. Just say sure. Can you do that? Sure,
I
I can
like
do
that.
that. And you work your way through it. So I don't decline it. I look at it as a challenge. But sometimes somebody will come to me and say, "Can you do this idea?" Usually it's a document. And I'll think to myself, well, what do I want to really want? So, for instance, somebody wanted me to do a film about Allen Ginsberg. He had felt close to the poet Allen Ginsberg, uh, as this guy was an artist also. And I said, well, I'm more interested in not just Allen Ginsberg, but the whole beat movement and how the change, post-war change in America, about how the counterculture came in. And, I used to, when I introduced the film at film festivals, I would say, and because of that, I could say fuck right now. And I want to arrest, and so I expanded it to what I was really interested in, which was the counterculture. And then it became a whole film about the beats about, not just Ginsberg, but William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, et cetera. And so I generally take that. I'm very interested in the counterculture anyway, and people that are kind of out there. And so that's why I wanted to make a film about Andy. And I wanted to make a film about the Beats and Orson Welles, etc. It wasn't necessarily conventional subjects that I was interested in. I was interested in people that were pushing the envelope. I wish I had made a film about Robert Altman and Stanley Kubrick. And I made a obituary film, Stanley Kubrick, memorial film, but that's all. Those are the artists I'm interested in every field, and I still am. And so that if you look at my documentaries, they're mostly about that. And it's simply what you chase in a way when you just say, okay, I'd love to do this. My son's a filmmaker, mostly documentaries. He was in Korea making a film. He just made a film about Providence, Rhode Island. Now he's making a film, and now he's making a film about Jeremy working system. And I said, how did you end up in Korea? He said, I don't know. I was interested in Korea. I know a lot of people. So it's just something that goes through your head, and it's a subject matter. And then you go and you bring your own style to it, and your own sensibilities to it.
And so you've talked a lot about outsiders and avant-garde film. What are your favorite films?
Yeah, I watched Rambo 2 last night.
I love Rambo too.
I definitely watched it. I don't even the George Cosmatos. I don't even know who that director is. But something that cooked up that Stallone cooked up with James Cameron, apparently. A lot of Vietnam in it. And so I like all movies. There's something to be seen, I like watching it. So what are they going to do here? Are they going to, I'm looking at it as a filmmaker, but still, I'm hooked on the story. So story does work in a particular Hollywood way. But I like 8.5. I mentioned it earlier.
Yes.
Like those films very much. I think they're important. I mentioned 3 American filmmakers that are very important to me: Kubrick, Wells, and Workman. Mm-hmm. I for a long time I only cared about Workman. I just thought he was so interesting, so courageous. And I read somewhere that he was a bomber pilot in World War II, and whoever wrote that said, so you can imagine when he confronted Hollywood, he couldn't care less. He wasn't afraid of them at all. Right. He was a flying bomber. Yeah, I think Robert Altman's really interested. I love Robert Mike Lee. I'm mentioning directors because sometimes it's not just one film; it's the body of Mike Lee. I think is terrific. The old new wave, Nouvelle Vague directors I like very much. I once met Claude Chabrol. I was kind of a host at a DGA event. So we were sitting talking, and I said, I made a film recently, or not recently, 10 years ago, called The Money, which is still around. And I had the actor, the lead, on the beach. It took place in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I had him digging crabs, these little crabs that you see on the beach something. Right. Because I thought of your film where you had the crabs. And he said to me, Chuck, I made so many films. I don't remember the crabs.
Wow. Wow.
I said, well, I remember.
Here you are paying tribute.
I was. But I loved all those Nouvelle Vagues. Alan, they're very different filmmakers, but they were given the facility to make films, and that was what's great. So I like those films. I love Fellini. And among contemporary films, I'm looking forward to seeing Coppola's new film, which hasn't come out yet. I hope people will still talk about it by the time they see this. Right. But Megalopolis, I know it's gotten a lot of bad talk, but I don't care. I'll see it anyway. And then I hear that other films are pretty good and see them. But I can't really watch the cartoon films. Marvel
Fair
films.
enough.
It's just they're noisy. I don't care. Maybe I'm just too old for this.
And Altman films, what stands out to you in terms of titles? Nashville,
certainly. Nashville, yeah. Big film, and I would watch it over and over. And I still would watch it if it was on TV. I'd watch a lot. Yeah, there are some films that you just watch over and over. You just Scorsese does that. He watches the same things over and over. I'm disappointed with Scorsese. I thought he could have gone farther. Not that I'm the guy to judge him, but he just, it's just too much action, too much gratuitous gunshots and things like that. Right. And so I felt that it kind of leans on that. And when he does a film that doesn't have any guns in it, they're kind of flat. So he does a fabulous job. This detective novels, and Elmore Leonard is considered a great writer of that. So Marty is certainly part of that world. The greatest of that. I'm a little disappointed with that. But there are other filmmakers that are around.
Scorsese's works have become quite long recently, and I mean that seems to be the trend in Hollywood in general. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I prefer movies that are 90 minutes, but 8.5 was, I don't know, almost 3 hours if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because I think now they get away with it.
Yeah.
So, or they play at a film festival. Uh, there's a new film coming out where there's a 10-minute intermission, and it's each side of the intermission is an hour and a half or more. So it's a long sit,
Yeah.
and but it won the best film in Venice. I wish I could remember the name.
Right.
Martin Scorsese can get away with it. He can just say no,
Right.
to play that, and the people are happy to work with him, or feel that he's got a point, so they go. So you can make it, naturally. If you're making a film, you have a lot of scenes that hit the cutting room floor. I mean, you're just
Right.
trying to get within the time, and so this happens. But if you're strong, or you have a strong film that's already performed, maybe in film festivals or someplace like that, you just say no. It's got to be 3 hours and 1 minute. And used to be that the exhibitors, this was a joke, but it isn't a joke. They said, well, we can't sell any popcorn when you have a film out. They don't have time to go out and come back in again, because we can't schedule. If we want to schedule our normal 5 or 6 film showings, or 3 or 4 showings, whatever it would be, it has to, our gaps in between are not going to be long enough.
Right.
And we listened to that. When I was making trailers, you would get feedback, from exhibitors. You would talk to exhibitors a lot. And that was interesting. The whole movie industry was always very interesting. As I said, it was like the toy business thing.
How have you seen the movie industry change for the better or for the worse in your time?
How has it changed?
And obviously streaming and
Well, yeah, that point. That's important, and confuses. They're confused by it. I mean, they don't know which way to go, because they want to go in the direction of profit. So if they not every movie, they know that every Clint Eastwood movie may not be, but they're still going to do whatever he wants, usually, because they want to continue. So there's other reasons, not just profit, but generally it's the end of it is profit. So they're trying to figure out a way to work, and they're making a lot of mistakes. Disney made major mistakes in this. Universal didn't. So go figure. Disney was always the sharp one, and Universal was the dull. So I think that the executives are a little different. I think the executives are in a way much more well schooled in movie making. They went to film school.
oh wow.
Hang out with filmmakers. I mean, that's what they're interested in. But it's still a very, very much a business. It's I keep making the same remark, but it just is. People just don't get it. They just don't understand that. They didn't make the movie. Kevin Costner didn't make this series of movies to aggrandize himself. He was already grand. He did it because he wanted to make the movie, the money that his TV series made, whatever it would be. There's no question about it. And I think we're all there. I think even people who have this arty facade like me, or I could try to do, are interested in, when it comes to a certain kind of movie, in the money. So the year I did 1941, the Spielberg movie, where I was just there was no studio involved, just me and Steven, It's people. Uh, the I could bill anything I want. You know, it was just when I do Michael Jackson videos, you can't bill enough. So that sounds very, very awful. It doesn't, it doesn't sound right, but it's just the way, because that makes up for me doing, Paul Bartel film, somebody else's film. It's true, So you try and balance that because it is a business, but it even more important than a business. And by the way, fine art, painting, is very much a business.
Sure.
And actually, Scorsese made a very good film about that, short film. I think it was Nick Nolte was a painter. Where the dealer is making half the money. I didn't know we were going to discuss money so much, but it does run that industry.
Of course. You got to follow the money. Absolutely.
And you do, if you do follow money in politics, but in movies,
exactly.
You find that that's where it stops. That the decisions are made by studios too. So I think that has never changed. Yes, what is different about studios? That has never changed. It's just the decision. So people who work at studios at the medium level, not even at a highest level, or make a great deal of money. They don't want to get fired.
Right.
And that's another big thing. There was a woman that I worked for who was the supervisor of the film I did for HBO, and she told me that she said, "Look, I want you to make whatever movie you make, but I don't want to get fired. So let's make the movie that's best for HBO."
Yeah. Fair
so
enough.
do that. But on the other hand, I used to say this a lot, that you're not only having this, making money, but you're in this glorious world of filmmaking where you can work with the world,
amazing people, and do cool things.
And your ingredients are so it's not like you have to, cut your ear off,
Right.
But I did feel, and that's I think why I made Visionaries, the film about the experiment, because I felt, as I said, guilty about it sometimes. They should, they don't have any sponsors. They get along, they're like poets, but they don't get this extra stuff. On the other hand, if you didn't worry about money, I would have probably made more movies.
Sure.
I have to make a living, but I like making even if it was the smallest house.
So you've worked with, with Michael Jackson and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and HBO and Disney. Who are some of your favorite people and institutions to work with?
I like them all, actually. I love working, and a lot of it depends on the individual. Like I would like working on the Oscars because I like working with Gilbert Cakes, the late Gilbert Cakes, who was the producer on 14, 15 shows. And he really understood everybody and did a great job. And he's the one that produced the Billy Crystal films and all those films, and became famous. There are the studios are all, depends on who you're working for. I liked working with MGM when they were viable. It was cool to walk into MGM to the lot,
Right.
when it was a lot before it was Sony. And it was terrific to see, the streets and the backgrounds, Showboat and all this kind of stuff. This was many years ago, but still, that was very exciting to see. I think that basically the larger the institution, the easier it is to get lost there. So I like that. So I
lost in a good way.
Yeah, I just did my thing and I handed to them. I tried not to have any fights.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
You have to, if you want to do something, it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, if me or somebody who's just churning out, who's not just churning out, but churning out, popular movies, you need the support of these places. You need their money, not just their money, but you need their institutional support. So I've made the films that I love that never came out or hardly
Right.
ever.
They need a
Not
distributor.
Yeah. So you need all these partners.
Yeah.
And so I never really held it against them that they were, businesses. They're businesses. So
Sure.
that's the way I like. I remember the first time I worked for a studio. It was here, worked for a studio, and but I guess I still feel it. I feel if I go into a Warner Brothers or somewhere and have a meeting or something, I feel like hey, that's a real world that I'm interested in. I guess it's like politicians who they go to the Senate or the House or something. They feel, oh, this is the institution that I should be in.
Right. And speaking of institutions, you've worked at quite a few colleges lecturing. Tell us about that.
I always like that. I like working at colleges. I lectured at 20 or more.
Wow.
And they always, and they also paid a little bit. But I liked kind of working out what I'm thinking. Even now,
right.
To yak about something that's kind of in the air is very interesting to me because it makes focus. So I like giving lectures about movie making at various colleges, and I did it for a while. And then during the whatever they call the Great Recession, the 2000,
2008, 2009.
exactly right. So my business has always gone up and down with that.
Sure.
Yeah. So because people didn't have the extra money to hire, so I was looking around and I saw that a school that I had lived nearby that I kind of liked, Purchase College, was looking for somebody, and so I applied, and they took me. I don't think I was the first choice for them. I really don't. But I think whoever the first choice was didn't take it. But I never minded being the second or third choice. Really, what there's. So I went to teach film at Purchase, and at the time, my career was pretty good. And the teachers all asked me, "What are you doing this? Do you want to give back or something?" I said, "No, I don't want to give anything back." I mean, I probably said a yes, but I was really interested in the process.
Yeah.
You go up and lecture for an hour about a process that you never really articulate. I never to myself.
Right.
So I found that very interesting. But I
Right.
found and then I went to Chapman, which is the West Coast company, to do the same. After that, when I moved back to California, but the institution of the academic institution, which you can really see now in the way they're handling this real problem, is they're just so small-minded, to my mind, that it finally got to me. And I never, all these years, everything we're talking about, I never talked about when I worked for somebody, because I never did work for. I had my own company. I worked very short time, 4 or 5 years in the beginning of my career, usually not. And so I didn't have that kind of institutional style that I think one needs.
Yeah.
People understand much, much better than me.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really work for me. I wasn't happy. And so I stopped doing it, but I was getting too old for it.
Yeah.
I think that you have to be closer to the students age to be a good teacher. Oh, yet there are a lot of elderly teachers.
Well, they've got tenure.
The whole tenure idea was kind of silly.
Yes. Well, I mean, I have heard that the best way to learn something is to teach it. I mean, did you find that to be the case?
Oh, yeah. You really have to kind of figure it out in order to explain it, and so I like that. I mean, I like that.
It was almost like a forced introspection.
Yeah, because when you're making the film, you don't have that much time to think about it. I mean, and you certainly don't theorize. You're
Right.
being pragmatic usually, and trying to do what you think you want to do, but you don't really think about why. But you have to tell your students why. I think lots of times you get questions.
Yeah.
So and not just how. And so that was the best part of teaching. And the colleagues were good, although they were not usually successful filmmakers in the film department. But they were very smart and working. A lot of them were still working. So that part was good. But the whole institution, academic institution.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. And I mean, particularly for somebody who had, had your own company, been independent for so long, that is so hard to work for a big institution like a university with thousands of employees and, ballooning administrations these days. It's, yes.
Yeah, you're saying it better than yes. But you've had experience working for
I have. And, it's, they're big organizations and they've got a lot of structure and benefits and all of that. The grass is always greener. I mean, that's the thing, and it is what you're used to. But certainly it's nice to be on your own and not really have anybody to answer to, or even if you do, in a way, they're short stints. Whereas at any organization, it's you become institutionalized. There's a reason. There's a reason that word exists.
I mean, I admire those people that teach all the time, and that I don't think when this expression when you can't teach,
No.
They know a lot, and I would sit in classes, and I was like the head of the department, and I would sit in their class, and they would look at me. Why is Chuck sitting in my class? But I was interested in what they were teaching.
Right.
So, to some extent. So, but I don't know. It didn't sync up with all the things we're talking about today. It didn't sync up with that, and so on. I mean, I was not going to do it for long anyway. So
yeah.
So now I write mostly, and I'm writing a book. I have an article coming out of another magazine, write plays. All this time, I was writing plays all these whole years, and nothing that were in big hit, but they were getting produced, and so I work on that. But you do slow up. Warning to everybody watching, slow.
And so what's the book about, and what's the publication timeline? Do you have a publisher?
No. And I sometimes you have to self-publish these books, because a lot of people that are retired are making a book about whatever they did. They're writing a book about I was framed pictures or whatever I did, and I'm really great at it, and here's all my secrets. I tried not to do that, but I had to learn that there wasn't a bunch of eager publishers waiting for me to give you my memoirs, even though I knew people that were writing memoirs, and they would end up self-publishing. So they make it easy for you. So I don't know when it'll come out. I hope to finish by next year.
Okay.
And it's called The Secret of Cinema, and it's mostly about post-production. What happens
post-production? I see, the editing piece. Okay.
Because I feel that that's where you change your film. You add certain shots, you add certain sequences, you take things out, and that's what creates the artfulness of cinema.
It reminds me of it's a quote attributed to Stephen King, "Kill your darlings."
Yeah.
and he would talk about certain paragraphs or even vignettes or scenes within a story that, although he loved them for what they were, they didn't fit within the piece, the book that he was trying to write, and they didn't push the story along. Have you found yourself doing a lot of that in post production?
Well, sometimes you're doing it for in post-production writing or in making films.
In
Making
making
films,
film,
yes,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah. But I think I use more of my own shots than most people because I came up with making careful budget decisions of only shoot this, only shoot that, get what I want. I knew what I wanted, basically. And so I didn't want to cut anything because it was at that time thought of as, to me, essential. But then so you think all your shots,
Yeah, of course.
I have to see this.
Yeah.
When my son made his first film, we had huge fights over things that I need to see. Oh, but because of this, and you have great reasons.
Of course. Yeah.
And I feel sorry that I had to fight with my own son, but and he was right sometimes that we did want to keep him. But there are other people that and people would send me films and say, you don't have to say whether you like it or not, but just what do you think? And I would tell them, I say, but I'm going to tell you what I think. And they would say, okay, oh, sure. And then they wouldn't like, so I would tell people to cut certain scenes. Yeah, take that out. They would get mad. One woman I know, a really smart woman, made a film about a character that was mostly a mother. And I kept saying, take this, you don't need this scene. Oh, but I remember when my mother did that, and so it was a fiction film, but that's the way they do. And then they get encouragement from other people who are smarter than me about it and will tell them, oh, it's wonderful. Oh, it's great. That you made it. And I really loved it. And my brother loved it. And when people come in and they show me films and they say, well, all my friends thought it was so
Right.
or so-and-so, my teacher, yeah, well, you're not going to tell somebody, unless you're stupid like me, you're not going to tell anybody that
I think you're being kind. I'm with you 100%. And, I
when
was
you make a
trained
film and you send it to me, remember.
But I think it could be self-preserving to not tell people your honest opinion, and
Of
the person
course.
keeps practicing their mistakes. And I remember having this argument as something so simple as somebody made a pickle recipe, and I have made my own pickles over the years, and it took me 100 different iterations of this recipe to get it right. And I thought this person put too much cumin in their pickle recipe, and I was told not to say anything. And I didn't, and I felt bad by not saying anything because I'm like you, and that I wanna share it because it helps the person improve, and people need to hear honesty, but sometimes they don't want to.
Oh, and you want to help them. Well, why
Right.
should you see then?
Right.
So you say nothing,
Yeah.
I try to, but I end up putting my foot in it so often. So don't send me anything.
Any advice you'd give to people who are getting started in the industry or mid-career, about navigating Hollywood these days? What would you say?
Well, besides the word sure,
I love it. I really do. I think it's great.
hang in. I mean, you have to really persevere. You have to really be ready for that. To be ready to just get totally devastated, have problems, not really get it, have nobody like what you do, then they like it, and then you get used to that, and then they don't like it again. You're dealing with institutions that are self-protective, and so the thing is just to persevere, to have a vision, and as bullshitty as that sounds, but to have some sort of vision of anything, and persevere with it. Say, okay, I'll do it again. I'll do it differently. I'll do it. And then eventually you might have to give up on something, but usually you'll break through. You'll find another way to do something, get around it somehow. But it's very easy to say, never mind, I'll do something else. I don't mean another career, but on a particular film.
Yeah.
And I have films that I haven't finished that I really regret and not finishing. So I still, in my 150th year, say, I'm going to finish that film.
Right.
I still have one more scene to do and put that in there. And luckily, I know they're not studio films, they're my own independent films. So I can spend a lot of time. So we do.
Right.
But the best advice is just stay with it.
Yeah.
Stay with it. Anything, it's important, especially anything creative.
Right.
And also, on a more specific level, look to the creative side, not the business. Even though I spent a lot of time talking about the business thing, it's such a wonderful medium to work in, and that you should really look for that. Look for what can I do here? What is unsaid in this piece of work that I can show in a way that is not necessarily said. So what you do is you say it, and then you take out what you said and you put in maybe a scene that does that, shot.
Yes.
Piece of music or something.
Show, don't tell.
Yeah, often. Unless it's about telling, then you can do that. Godard used to whisper in their ear, give them earphones, and the actors, and he would tell them what to say, because that was very important to him. What they said, it sounded like nonsense to a lot of people, but that was important to him to he was creating his work. So you never know what it is, but the idea is to look for that, not just for the sake of being different or creative, but because it helps your work. It works with you. What is that record you think?
Oh, the record that I have behind me, that is Scrapple from the Apple by Charlie Parker.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, so that's like 1946, I think he did that. So that's a 78. That is a 78.
Really good for you. Yeah, I was a big jazz fan. I still am, actually.
Yeah, me too. Big time.
I heard a Monk song on TV, and I said, what's that? It was like in the middle of some entertainment piece.
Right.
And, but there it was. It's great.
Yeah, very nice. Very
And
nice.
I think that jazz, loving that jazz from when I was a teenager, that what they call modern jazz, it had a lot of effect on the way I got improvising. I'm not that improvisation, but just letting things happen.
Right.
So they can happen in the standard form. It's a wonderful film about Monk when he's playing the piano and he's recording something and he can't get it right, and somebody's coming over to help him. I'll get it again. And he does get it, whatever it is. So I think that feeling, when I was a teenager, I would go to montages.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It is the improvisation piece, and if you could let the jazz musician those sheets of sound like Coltrane, and be able to do that as a filmmaker, to be able to say, let's persevere until I find the path I was looking to go, or what I was trying to make.
Yeah, well, or you just trust yourself that
yeah,
okay, I'll do this chorus and I'll try that. I know it's going to work. It's going to work.
Yeah.
So you do it, and that works. Yeah. There used to be a museum of jazz movies in the middle of New York, and whenever I needed something like that, that's where I would go. It was always it was not really a museum. It was like a sales place where you would go and you buy a piece of.
I'm trying to think of the Jackie McLean movie that he starred in. and he was a heroin addict.
That's familiar. Yeah.
It was set in New York, but he was the star of it, and that's one of the few jazz movies that I can remember that were specifically about jazz. But I mean, there's the whole rockumentary, the whole music documentary
Yeah,
piece.
I like doing. I love using music in films, and I still do. And
Right.
The funny thing is, I don't really, I kind of fight against using too much music. Like Spielberg, very good filmmaker, just uses so much music.
Right.
And you don't really need it all.
No,
Yes.
and it could be lazy too. I mean, you could instead of showing the story through film, you could have music be too much of a driver of the.
Well, I mean, he's got his own agenda, Spielberg, so I'm not going to argue.
Yeah.
But and Marty Scorsese, I mean, he uses all that. I wrote about how much music. I once listed found it somewhere on the internet, all the songs that he used in Casino, let's say, or something.
Right.
One after the other. Robbie Robertson used to find them songs.
Yeah.
One after the other, with no meaning at all.
Right. A lot of people forget that Scorsese directed Woodstock.
No, he didn't.
Or he was a cinematographer.
No, he was the assistant to Thelma Schoonmaker, who became his editor.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I won't give him too much credit.
Was there.
Yeah.
But what's funny, I don't know if we're running out of time, but
please go for it.
Quick thing. Before I tell you this story about Woodstock, I want to tell you that when I moved to LA, and you would go and rent houses or whatever, I didn't know Brentwood from Hollywood. I mean, I didn't know anything about LA. I ended up living in Topanga Canyon, actually, in Mount after me, and in Santa Monica. I lived everywhere. So every time I would go to some fresh house, I thought, they would say, that Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy used to shack up.
Right.
And I loved it the first time I heard it, but then I heard it like the fourth time. So this became a traditional, kind of a story that everybody would tell about their house. Well, the same thing as Woodstock. Everybody in the film business at that time, and this was 69, and I was just getting started, but everybody worked at Woodstock, whether they did or not. They said they did. And I had just had a new baby, and I was not going to Woodstock, even though I could have. Yeah. I maybe I couldn't have, but I didn't go. But I even said I went to Woodstock. Everybody, that's what you said. Right. So this became a kind of an apocryphal theme in a way about Woodstock. So Scorsese was definitely there, and he claims, or somebody claims, that he directed. There's a scene where they walk around and interview people in the porta potties.
Yes.
And they claim that Martin Scorsese did that he directed that they gave him a cameraman, and he walked around and looking for what was called B-roll. And but Thelma was really the editor, and then Martin Scorsese came in as her assistant, and then she became his editor.
Gotcha. I do remember that scene. For whatever reason, they had the porta potty guy. I don't know what you would call him, but he had the truck and he had the hose, and he said, "My one son is in Vietnam and my other son is here," and then he's operating the hose, sucking out the porta.
Well, I mean, I was, he did a great job on those porta potties, so he knew what he was doing even then. But
it's amazing what scenes people remember and what people forget, and I guess that's why you got to watch certain movies multiple times, and it's like precious images. I watched it 5 times last night, and you could watch it 100 times and see something different every time.
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed making it. I mean, I just was all by myself upstairs in one cutting room, And I had this one assistant who would bring me the films. I would tape off what I wanted. It would go to the optical house. They would make a negative of the little scene. It could be this long. And I just hang it up on a hook and start cutting it in and start playing. And the first people that saw it was Bob Wise and a guy named David Shepard, who was a very famous film historian who happened to be working at the DGA. And they liked it. And I remember chasing Bob out the door saying, but Bob, do you think it should have, no, it's fine, leave it alone. Just like that. Bob was very abrupt. And so I did. And yeah, that was a great experience. Everybody should have that. Most people do, that are successful, have a moment or two that really they feel successful. They feel they got it right. And it worked even better than me. And I think whether you're, a landscape architect or whatever you are, there's a moment, lawyer. I have a friend who was a lawyer over 50 years, and he'll talk about one case where he wasn't even a star case. It was just something that he did. It was mentioning that, and it kind of makes things work and keeps you, again, that same perseverance. It keeps you going. I did that. But it also helps that I had all these people telling me, how great I was. So that's fun too.
Yeah. Sir Chuck Workman. Well, it's been a pleasure, and it's been great having you on the show.
Thank you. It was fun to talk.